You're listening to East of the Rockies, the Michigan Student Softball Podcast on WCBN Sports.
Well, Mr. Burns had done it. The power plant had won it, with Roger Clemens clucking all the while. Mike Scioscia's tragic illness made us smile, while Wade Boggs lay unconscious on the barroom tile. We're talking softball, from Maine to San Diego, talking softball. Mattingly and Canseco, Ken Griffey's grotesquely swollen jaw, Steve Sachs and his running with the law. We're talking Homer, Ozzie and the Straw.
I don't think that intro is ever going to get old. Hello, folks, and welcome to this week's episode of East of the Rockies, WCBN Sports' Michigan Softball Podcast. My name's Morris Fabry. Along with me, I have the usual gang, Jeremy Parks and Kevin Klein, and we've got an interesting episode for y'all today. We're going to pack in 4 interviews with 4 Michigan softball players that we've done over the course of the past couple weeks. Didn't get the chance to splice them in last week's episode, but this one will be chock full of them, so stay tuned for that. But before we get into it, we got to talk about last week. Michigan went out to Raleigh, North Carolina. Dalton Pataki and Leo Blavin on the coverage for that one. And the Wolverines went 3-1. I think all of us were under the impression that anything short of 4-0 would be a disappointment for Michigan. What were your guys' reactions to that series?
Well, I think that was the big theme that we were talking about last week is, and I asked you guys, I said, well, if they go 3-1, is that a disappointment? And I think JP said, well, it depends on how they lost. And it wasn't a great loss against Notre Dame. They clawed back at the end. They just didn't have enough. But I think their response was really encouraging against Notre Dame in the second game because they just came out fiery and they were dominant right from the start, scoring runs. I believe Blanco had that game. She was pretty good in the circle. So, yeah, 3-1. Do you want to have 3 losses this early on in the season if you're competing to host a super regional? Probably not. But still, it definitely some good signs from that weekend.
Well, I said last week that Notre Dame was not as good of a team this year as they were last year. I still stand by that. I think that first game against the Irish felt eerily similar to the USF game where you had a number of opportunities for the Wolverines at the plate, lack of timely hitting, another close loss, same score, 6-4. I think by the end of the season, Notre Dame does find themselves a ranked team, and I think that probably bodes well for Michigan in the overall scheme of things. But again, I agree with Kev. I think I wouldn't say it was a deal breaker by any means, and obviously it's disappointing and discouraging, I think, more than anything, just the fact that you had a great opportunity to go 4-0, especially going into the toughest weekend, in my opinion, of the entire season this weekend, and then another tough weekend coming next. So if you're the Wolverines, I think you're still feeling pretty good. You're in an all right spot. And like Kev said, the response going up the next game, ruling North Carolina State for the second game in a row, and then going out and beating Notre Dame by 7 runs, almost a rule win on Sunday, was equally as impressive.
Yeah, I got to agree with you, JP. I think that the similarities between the Notre Dame loss and the USF loss were absolutely striking. And for Notre Dame, their hits could not have been more timely. Betza really made only 2 mistakes the entire game, and both of them ended up home runs for Caitlin Brooks. Michigan struggled with runners on, but then after that, it really seems like they flipped a switch. The power has been coming for this lineup, most notably in the bat of Michigan's senior center fielder, Kelly Christner, who has been absurd. And that brings us to today's game. We're recording this at 5:20 on a Friday evening. Michigan, earlier today, beat New Mexico State 5-4.
By the skin of their teeth.
Woo! Yeah.
Not a good one.
No, and Tara Blanco, who was very impressive against NC State and Notre Dame on Saturday evening and Sunday, got a quick hook today. Megan Betza had to come in to a bases-loaded, no-outs jam. Michigan trailing until the 6th inning when Kelly Christner, a 3-run bomb to center field, the difference in the game. And it brings to light a stark reality for this Michigan offense, and that is that the top 3 hitters, Natalie Peters, Abby Ramirez, Kelly Christner, all hitting well over 400, and Christner, my God, something special this year.
Wait, is that a typo on the stat sheet?
What do you see?
I mean, her average starts with a 6.
Yeah, that's correct. She's 19 of 30 on the season, 4 home runs, 17 RBI in only 10 games. That puts her on pace for 102-ish on the year, depending on how many games the Wolverines play. That's over the course of 60 games. Softball seasons usually run 60, 62. The Wolverines single season record is 83 RBI. She's on pace to shatter that right now.
Well, let's play some over-unders again here later in the show. At this point, you have to take the over. I mean, it's just been... Obviously, the law of averages would state that things come back to a bit more of normalcy as the season goes on, but with the way that Kelly Christner's been producing against a very difficult early season schedule, I mean, it's by far one of the most impressive, the most impressive story so far for the Wolverines this season is the fact that I remember that first game down in Florida, Morris, we thought, Kelly Christner off to a cold start at the plate. That seems like a decade and however many RBIs ago. So it's been very, very impressive so far for the Wolverines.
Yeah, basically, I mean, it's the Kelly Christner show. The team is relying on her to drive in the runs. I mean, she had all 5 RBIs today, a bloop single that turned into a 2 RBI hit, plus the home run. And she's slugging over 1,000 too. So it's not just with the 600 average and she's flaring singles into right field. She's driving the ball to all fields, power to all fields. Very impressive. Very a good sign. And JP mentioned the law of averages. So Kelly Christner probably not going to hit 633 for the rest of the year, but you can say the same thing for Tara Blanco, Lindsey Montemurano. They're not going to hit 214 for the rest of the year too, so that the rest of the lineup will come along. It just might take a little while.
Yeah, this team is 7-3, and while they've gotten great production out of the top of the lineup, this game against New Mexico State, kind of the year in a microcosm to an extent, because the bottom 6 hitters in the lineup, not a single base runner the entire game.
Really not good.
Yeah,
Lindsey,
not what you want.
Lindsey Montemurano continued to struggle too defensively again today, had another error in the field. Really, it's just been down so far for Monty, and really we're struggling to figure out a reason why too, just watching it.
Yeah, and the error, it wasn't a hard hit ball that kind of took a funny hop. It was just a slow dribbler. We've seen her make that play so many times. And I'm not jumping to conclusions here saying, oh, it's in her head because we're 10 games into the season and she usually comes alive in Big Ten play. But definitely early season struggles. I think we've gotten to that point. We've gotten that sample size where we can say maybe Montemurano needs to make a couple adjustments to turn things around.
Yeah, and I think that the leadership on this team is such that she's really not going to feel any pressure, any anger coming from her teammates. That's kind of an environment that has been fostered on the team so far this year. And I'm with you, Kev, on the whole law of averages thing. I think the bottom of this lineup will, return to the expectations that we have of them, which is most of the lineup hitting over 300. And this weekend would be a heck of a time to do so.
There's an opportunity this weekend if things shape out. So I'm going both between the Nutter and the Garmin, so the next 10 days of games pretty much. If you look at where potential teams would fall in terms of rankings at the end of the season, I've got an opportunity for Michigan to score 7 ranked wins this weekend.
Yeah.
Overall.
It's realistic, and we'll get to that, but first we're going to go into the interviews that we had. First of all, Alex Subcheck, sophomore catcher, had a very good first weekend for the Wolverines, has been spraying the ball all over the field this season, albeit with not a lot of luck. So here it is, our interview with Alex Subcheck. All right, so that was our interview with Alex Subcheck, a really nice person to talk to. And I think that what's been most impressive about her this season has been her ability to throw out runners on the base paths. Caught another runner stealing today against New Mexico State. The average, not quite where we would expect it to be. But, again, I think that is a message that's been passed across throughout the team this year, that these players aren't really worried about the expectations on them.
Yeah, and I think, and we'll get to it in just a few minutes, but Natalie Peters, Morris, you talked to her, and she said, well, expectations for us as a team differ than what everyone else expectations that others place on them. And I think that's kind of the theme that is echoed within the team, and that's the thing. We're spending time here talking. 7-3. Is this team gonna compete for the Women's College World Series in June? But at the end of the day, they know what they're capable of. They know they can catch fire. They know what kind of chemistry they have on the team, and there's no one that knows the team better than the actual players. So that's the thing. I mean, we can't make knee-jerk reactions at the beginning of the season. We can because we're talking about it.
It's how we make a podcast,
right? No, and that's what makes for good radio. But they're not going to make those same knee-jerk reactions.
For sure. One thing I thought that was interesting about that interview with Subcheck is how she mentioned that she had to change her approach at the plate depending on, which pitcher is out there in the circle. And that's something that I think resonated also with your interview with Faith Canfield, which is coming up later in the podcast. But I think that really the strategy, the individual strategy and the coaching strategy, adjusting for various approaches in the circle, approaches at the plate, is it's an interesting aspect of coaching a softball team and of playing softball, and it's I think a cerebral aspect to the game that may kind of get ignored by the lay viewer.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking, you asked the question about what it was like to face those Florida pitchers, that pitching staff, and Subcheck said, it was exciting. It was great. She was happy she had that opportunity to do so, because you think about it, if Michigan wants to be the best, they have to beat one of the best, and that's what they had the opportunity to do a couple weeks ago against Florida.
Yeah, it's got to be a struggle getting yourself up mentally for, a game against Florida and a game against New Mexico State. You can kind of see it in the different results for this team. I think the team as a whole, they say that they don't really care about who they're going to face down the road, but it's got to be in their minds that they're playing, a top-notch school, or they're playing a team like New Mexico State. And, while I think they have the right mental approach to things, I also feel like at times they do play to the level of their competition, at least thus far. All right, that's going to bring us to our next interview. And for this one, we interviewed Maddie Uden. We've been at least interested in doing a series of freshman interviews because these are players who, for the most part, are not going to get a ton of exposure on the team this year, although that may change, depending on how the third base position plays out for this team. But the first person we interviewed was Maddie Uden. Kev talked to her back on Wednesday, February 15th, after that first weekend against Florida. So without further ado, here that is. All right, and again, that was Kevin Klein's interview with Maddie Uden. So we haven't seen much out of Uden this season so far. Got another at bat, I think, last weekend. She's 1 for 2.
That average just it's plummeting. I don't know what's going on. Down to 500.
Yeah, but she really seems like she's got a competitive drive to her, and I think that's going to suit her very well down the road with this team. Certainly she'll be probably behind the 8 ball when it comes to playing time with Abby Ramirez and Lindsey Montemarano on that left side of the infield. But I expect big things out of Maddie Uden going forward.
Well, and I think the key when I talked to her is I said, well, you have so many veterans in the infield who have played, who have been 2, 3, 4 year starters. What's that like? And she basically just echoed, it's great to be able to watch players like Ramirez or Montemarano, who are such good defensive players day in and day out, because at the end of the day, she can make those offensive adjustments. That that's personal, but when you actually get to see how those players are playing defensively and pick up those tips, I think she said it was really important, and I think that's definitely something to keep in mind going forward.
I think it's a fun interview too, because it's going to be exciting to see. You're getting Maddie Uden right now as a true freshman, and you're going to have 3 years, or somebody who takes over after us, we're going to be long graduated and trying to pay off debt.
You guys might be. We'll see.
I'm trying to stick here for 5th, 6th, 7th
Mo
year.
may never leave, but you'll get an opportunity to see some of these players, and I think that's why it's cool for us to take a look at some of the freshmen who might not have, as much time at the plate or as much time in the field, but getting an opportunity to see where these folks start at and where they wind up. So whether that's your questions about, things that she picked up on from different coaches and how that's going to affect the way that she grows as a player here at U of M. I think that's probably my favorite thing about the freshman interviews, at least. They're really, really cool to hear.
Yeah, one of my favorite things is their insight into the behind-the-scenes adjustments that they have to make to the college game. You know, I can't speak of any experience having watched high school softball or played, of course, as far as the difference between playing in high school and playing in college. But there is a lot that depends on what kind of travel team you play for, where you play your high school ball, as to, you know, what kinds of adjustments you need to make from high school to the college level. And I think something that gets lost in translation oftentimes when we think of college athletes in general coming into their freshman years and expecting them to produce is that, you know, they're kids. They're 17, 18 years old. They've got academic concerns. You know, in some instances, they're moving from very far away. And, you know, I think it's admirable that so many of them are able to adjust so well.
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, even if they don't, you know, hit the ground running, their, you know, first year starter, that's why this year where the playing time might be a little more sporadic is so important to learn the culture, to learn how to make that balance, you know, between, you mentioned the academics, Mo, to make that balance between academics and being, you know, a collegiate athlete as well.
All right, so that's going to bring us to our next interview. We're really firing through these. You know, we've got so much good content and we're eager to get it out. And this will be from Natalie Peters, whom I talked to on Wednesday evening. She's really been a standout performer for the Wolverines so far this season, hitting over 450 at the time of this recording, showcasing speed, and learned some interesting stuff about her development as a player in this interview. So here it is, Natalie Peters. All right, so that was the interview with Natalie Peters, and off to a bit of a rough start. I think I need to spend a little more time preparing my questions, and, you know, I don't think we've gotten very good reactions from either Coach Hutchins or the players we've interviewed when we've asked about the issue of expectations.
Well, I mean, it like I said earlier, because... and I think she hit the nail on the head. She referred to expectations as tricky, and they are tricky because I think our expectations of the team are completely different than theirs because we were talking about earlier that we were expecting Tara Blanco to hit 20 home runs, but maybe that's not her approach this season. I don't know.
Yeah, and, you know, we consume, as fans, as outside observers, we consume the sport in an entirely different way than how the people on the teams playing day-to-day consume the sport. You know, we get interested really into the matchups, into long-term projections for the team, into, you know, trends and narratives where I think, you know, it's easy to kind of ignore all of that when you have things that you can focus on day-to-day sorts of improvements, like the kinds of things that these players do to get better.
I like the fact that we have a somewhat unofficial endorsement as well to continue with Slap Sisters. If Abby and Natalie continue to hit together towards the top of the lineup or 9-1 or whatever.
I like the word cute.
Yeah, she said it's cute.
Yeah, it's us. It's us.
I would say it's undoubtedly us. And yeah. I'm glad that
I'd say it's undoubtedly
they're
cute.
starting to realize what we bring to the table here. The expectations have been discovered.
See, their expectations of what we do is probably very different than our expectations of us.
You don't think that in team meetings they sit down and they talk about, you know, how to attack our interviews when we come at them every Wednesday?
Hey, we go full force.
Yeah, I think as far as expectations are concerned, especially when you have a season so far that's probably underwhelmed expectations from the fan base at large, I'd say that they're very difficult to answer, especially as a player, without, you know, being negative to some extent about either your own play or the team's play in general. And I don't think any of the players are out to do that. It's a very positive culture on this team, and as such, we're not going to get very good answers when we come and asking about expectations, even if that is something that they're thinking about consistently. Speaking of questions that are tough to answer, preparations, I'm 2 for 2 in getting players to categorize hot dogs as sandwiches in my interviews.
I think all all three of mine have said no because it's not a sandwich.
It's not.
They have the right answer. I mean, I didn't even tell them at the beginning, hey, say no because this is the right answer. They just said no because they know.
Smart.
Yeah, I think. Well, I don't know if I'm leading them in that direction or whatever.
Yeah, Mo, we're gonna have to check the tape on that one, dude.
Yeah, I guess you'll get a chance to do it. Also, as an aside, I liked the Franz Ferdinand Take Me Out as a walk-up song for Natalie Peters. Another interesting wrinkle is to how she became a slap hitter. Now, I, again, pretty ignorant as to how softball players develop from, pre-K to the diamond at the college level, but Natalie, a right-handed hitter until 8th grade, switched the side, and it obviously suits her as to, the success that she's having right now, but that's got to be just a huge adjustment to make after playing softball one way for so long.
Well, yeah, it's got to be a huge adjustment, but it had to benefit her going forward because I think as a slap hitter, you differentiate yourself, you switch it up. When you're going against, it makes it difficult for the pitcher to attack you in certain ways, not just a normal left-handed hitter. But hats off to her. I mean, that is I would love to learn more about that whole decision to all of a sudden say, you know what, I'm a right-handed hitter. I don't know how to hit left. Let's just try it. Because, I mean, if you say, if you told me to do something left-handed, I couldn't do it.
7th grade me tried to pass for a switch hitter so that I got more playing time because I rode bench a lot on the baseball team. So I remember specifically in one game, coach in the dugouts looking for a third baseman, and I was always relegated to right field because I had absolutely no talent and most kids couldn't hit it out that far, so I couldn't mess anything up. And I was like, oh, I'll play third base. He said, all right. And I said, I can hit left too. And he was like, you're not hitting. And I was like, okay. My few base hits in like my entire middle school era were from overthrows on the infield.
Well, those don't sound like base hits.
Well, you know what?
Errors.
It makes me feel better to say that they were. So
you define a hit as just putting the ball in play?
I live in my own world.
It's about the on-base percentage in the end. That's a sabermetric answer. And
yeah, we didn't really record OBP, but mine was probably under $1. So
yeah, well, we're going to play our final interview of the week, and that's to someone whose on-base percentage has impressed so far, but even more than that, a slugging percentage that is pretty high. It's Faith Canfield, Michigan's second baseman, had to fill the shoes of Sierra Romero heading into this season, and Kevin talked to her Wednesday night about her hot start to the season. All right, so interesting interview. I thought that Faith was at least it sounded like she had a fun time talking with you, Kev.
I think Kev just brings that personality. People love talking to Kev.
I honestly, I don't want to dissect my interviewing skills or anything like that. I just ask the question.
Yeah, we're all a little raw as far as interviewing skills are concerned. I think it's something we can refine throughout the length of this podcast, throughout the season. But
I'm no Bob Costas or Robin Roberts by any stretch of the imagination.
But you didn't have to start off going through the fire like Mo. I think the first ever interview you had was with Hutch, was it not?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't really call that an interview.
That's like one question.
The media day question was my favorite.
The answer just no.
Are there any dates circled on the calendar?
Nope. That will end the media day.
That'll be a hard no.
Nobody was asking her any questions, and Mo realized why that was.
Yep. I did think that it was interesting that the team really, took strides to address their lack of power in the opening weekend, and it really did show throughout that weekend against Notre Dame and against NC State, most notably in the bat of Kelly Christner. But, Canfield herself hit a walk-off run rule grand slam against NC State. And that's a development that I think Michigan needs to have throughout this season because they've got some really impressive power bats to replace, and so they're going to need power contributions from unexpected sources.
Yeah, they understood a weakness and made adjustments to make that weakness a strength, and I mean, there's the difference. And we even saw it today where, at least for Christner, trying to drive the ball. I know Peters had a nice hit to left field as well. But that's the sign of a good team, to be able to recognize something that's not really working and trying to make adjustments to make it work.
Yeah, I also like that Faith, as opposed to a couple other players that we talked to, actually targeted the number 2 spot as a spot where she really liked to hit. It could come down to something as simple as just getting more at-bats, and certainly all of these players are very flexible when it comes to, suiting the team needs at any given moment. But what do you guys think of Faith Canfield at the number 2 spot playing, Ramirez and Peters as the 9-1 instead of the 1-2?
I think that was maybe something that we thought was a more likely opportunity before we had that first tournament down in Tampa, because it was to everybody's surprise that Natalie Peters and Abby Ramirez were hitting 1 and 2. And I don't know. I think I'm kind of with the players on this one. I'm flexible as long as they're able to put the ball in play and keep producing hits to give you the most team player answer ever, but I don't mind it that much.
I mean, you know what? The thing is, though, it really, I cannot stomach batting someone who's hitting almost 500, number 9. I mean, Abby Ramirez is at 469 after today's game. Why? She should be getting as many at-bats as possible, so why not bat Peters and Ramirez up at the top like they have? Christner obviously owns that number 3 spot. And then, I mean, Canfield, I think today was maybe the 4th game she hit cleanup. Like, that's fine. Yeah. She's being productive. To be a good cleanup hitter, you don't have to hit a home run every other time.
Yeah, I also think that it suits her. And the results, at least in the New Mexico State game, speak for themselves. In that the 2 hitters ahead of Christner got on base, Christner drove him in, and that was the difference in the game. You want to give as many at-bats as possible to the players who are hitting, and that's what worked. It
was fun. We were talking about it earlier, I think, after that Subcheck interview, about how the team is very focused on, one at-bat at a time, one game at a time, and I said, well, you just heard I asked her the question about, well, what do you think about playing the likes of Florida State, UCLA, Arizona State twice, all ranked teams? And she said, I don't even know who we're playing.
Yeah, that can't be true. There's no way, right?
I mean, maybe that's just the team answer. I don't know.
That's
I would assume it is.
I feel
have to know that they were playing Florida
You have
State.
to at least in some way probably prepare for a unique opponent. Like, I think every team probably brings a little bit something different to the table. Maybe it's not like football where you're going to change the practice conditions based off of who you play, but
I was going to say, it can't be a situation where, let's get to the diamond and see who we draw today. Like, one day, it could be UCLA, could be Long Beach State, could be New Mexico State. Hopefully it's a good draw.
Well, interesting that you mentioned those 3 names, Kev, because those are 3 teams that Michigan will be playing.
Funny how that worked,
played.
Right?
Ooh.
Yeah, what a segue that was.
Call that a 2-wheeled vehicle. That's a segue right there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We paused for the laughter there, of course. We also have one final interview. Courtney Richardson, whom Kev talked to last Wednesday. We're going to play the audio of that real quick. All right, that's the audio from the Courtney Richardson interview.
Thanks, Mo. Appreciate that. We had technical difficulties on the interviewer's end.
Yeah. There were some good questions. I heard that it was a good interview.
Was there supposed to be nothing there?
Yes, there was. There was supposed to be nothing there.
Full disclosure, I made an error with the voice record app on the iPhone, so I now have a problem with Apple.
Well, we hope that she doesn't hold it against us, but maybe we'll get to her in the future.
For the record, she said a hot dog is not a sandwich, and that's the only part of the interview that matters.
Yeah. No, I'm kind of with you on that. At least as to that's the part of the interview that matters. I disagree on the answer. Anyway, we're going to continue off that segue, which was interrupted by our non-interview, a jab at Kev, if you will. I mean, last week we were bashing JP. It's only right that we turn it to Kev this time around.
Wait, has our relationship been...
Let's just talk about the tournament this weekend.
Time heals all wounds.
I was going to say, I think JP forgot about it before he just mentioned it. Thanks a lot, Mo.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. All right, so Michigan, I think it's fair to say that they were expected to beat New Mexico State and beat them more handily than they actually did. Tomorrow, they're not going to be able to get off to a slow start. They're playing Texas A&M, ranked number 18 in the country going into this Mary Nutter Classic, but they have tallied a couple of impressive wins so far, beating Florida State, the number 1 team in the country, 2-0 last night, and today beating Arizona State 2-1 in 9 innings. This is a team that's clearly, overshooting its expectations. They only went 9-15 in a stacked SEC conference last year. a team that's kind of shot up to the top of the rankings out of nowhere. And it will be a big test for the Wolverines. What are you guys' thoughts on this matchup?
Well, it entirely starts for Texas A&M in the circle with Samantha Show, if that is indeed who the Wolverines see, but it would be hard to think it'd be anybody else after the performance that she put up against the number one team in the country in Florida State. Went 7 full, only gave up 4 hits to the number one team in the country, fanned 15 batters in that game. Absolutely incredible numbers. She's 5-0 to start the season. She was SEC all-freshman team last year. Really, that's where it starts for Texas A&M, and then that lineup really through and through can pick it up from just about any point in it. So for Michigan, it's going to come down to Megan Betza coming out and having her best day yet. Talk about the Florida game, talk about it all you want, but Megan Betza, we saw today, came into a bases loaded, none out situation. Iffy in the come in to
didn't give up any runs credited to her.
Right, but hit a batter.
Inherited runners are an important stat.
Was it hit a batter, walked 2 in,
and then decided to be Megan Betza?
So,
yeah,
and that it takes a little bit for Megan to warm up sometimes when she gets into games and starts. So there can't be time for that against a Texas A&M lineup. And the Wolverines' batting order, as you mentioned, the top of the order has been on fuego. It's always going to come down to the bottom of the order. If they can produce, then Michigan will definitely not only stand a chance, but stand a very good chance of taking down what's proving to be one of the hottest teams in the country at the moment.
And that game will be at 3:30 Eastern time tomorrow, so Saturday against Texas A&M. They'll follow that one up with the second game of a doubleheader against Bethune-Cookman. And I think in this case, the schedule does favor the Wolverines. They get to play, after a high-profile tilt against a team that is, to put it frankly, quite miserable at softball. That should be a run rule, and anything less, I think, would be a cause for concern for the Wolverines. Moving on from that, they play Florida State Sunday. It'll be Sunday evening for us, Sunday afternoon out in Palm Springs, California. But Florida State, I said Florida the first time. That's my mistake. Florida State will be coming on the second game of a doubleheader. Their first game of that day will be a tilt with the number 6 ranked UCLA Bruins. We'll get to them later. But the schedule, again, favoring Michigan, it appears, in this matchup.
And I think for Florida State, again, a lot of really good numbers, not a ton of power really for Florida State. Jessica Warren, the only one that has a bunch of power in that bat, has 4 home runs already this season. But you look at Alex Powers and Morgan Claveman, they're all hitting above 400 at the top of the lineup there, and that's another opportunity for Michigan to bring into the circle and really have a shutdown game. But that's where they make their money, is at the plate. And then looking to the circle, every pitcher out of the 3 in their rotation that's seen legitimate time has a sub-1 ERA. Cassidy Davis, Megan King, and Jessica Burrows are all sub-1. Davis has a 0 ERA. You look at Megan King, .46, Burrows, .86. Burrows and King are both 5 wins, and Burrows has 1 loss. So really, all around, a fantastic Florida State Seminoles team.
It's a good team, don't get me wrong. They're 11-1, but they haven't played anybody.
That's also pretty true, with the exception of A&M, who beat them.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is going to really be a good indication on how good Florida State is. I don't think anybody is, dismissing how, that they're a good quality team, but they're playing tomorrow, Arizona, and then their 2 games, UCLA and Michigan. So 3 straight ranked opponents, top 15 opponents. So, I mean, I could see Florida State going 1-2, and then maybe we're having a debate on who really is the number 1 team. Is Florida State the number 1 team right now?
According to the rankings.
According to the rankings, yes. I don't know if that's, necessarily.
It's very likely that the number 1 team may come out of this tournament if they can go out of it unscathed, because there are really high-profile games going on, both in this one and the Judy Garman Classic next week.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough game for Michigan, despite the fact that Florida State's only tough game so far has been A&M. The talent is there, and the ability is there as well.
Yeah, Jessica Burrows in particular causes me nightmares. Shut down Michigan in the Women's College World Series last year, a complete game, 1-0 shutout. Florida State's trajectory pretty interesting. They didn't really impress during the regular season, but seemed to catch fire, winning a lot of close games in their postseason run, and in the end, lost a heartbreaker to Auburn to end their season. also, Texas A&M, I will make this point. I think that their record probably overstates how good they are. They've won a lot of close games this season. And I personally expect Michigan to beat Texas A&M, and I expect Michigan to beat Florida State.
You heard it there first.
Now who's bullish?
I mean, I think I'm realistic.
All right.
We're moving on to Arizona State, who Michigan plays at 4:30 on Sunday, 4:30 Pacific time, 7:30 Eastern time. The A&M and Florida State games you can catch on Flow Softball. It's a paid sort of thing. They're covering a lot of games this weekend, so the coverage may not be totally Michigan focused, but it's still quality stuff and an option to watch the Michigan team.
The only option this week.
The only option.
Sorry,
this week.
folks. No free radio.
Yeah.
So are we in? Did we just endorse them?
No. It's the only way to watch.
We endorsed them in the same way Natalie Peters endorsed the Slap Sisters.
Yeah, tacitly.
Yeah. So
key to Arizona State, Mo, starts at the plate with senior Chelsea Gonzalez, and it ends with the fact that they have a 4-deep rotation that is also very good all the way around. They've had a little bit of a tougher schedule to open up the season than maybe a Florida State has, but nonetheless, again, especially in the circle, the talent is there. They've already got 3 pitchers that have seen equal time, and then you've got Alyssa Loza coming in as a 4th option, so it's hard to tell just exactly who Michigan could face, but really they all showboat in pretty much the same way. So, I mean, for Michigan, again, I think in this game it more comes down to at the plate than it does in the circle for them.
And they're no slouch. I mean, they took A&M, or they lost A&M yesterday in 9 innings, 2-1, so that was a really tightly fought game. Arizona State, you think about the two, or they play each other back to back in separate tournaments, but back to back games against Arizona State. So these teams will see each other twice, and it's another competent opponent, another ranked opponent that Michigan's going to have to get through when you look at these back-to-back tournaments.
Yeah, I think Arizona State's loss to A&M actually came today right before we recorded this podcast, but either way, it I think is their lone loss on the season. I could be mistaken. But a solid team. They only went 6-17 in the Pac-12 last year, but that is a stacked conference, and they have a rotation that just does not walk hitters. They've struck out 61, only walked 5 hitters the entire season, so Michigan's approach at the plate is going to... I know, JP, you often rail against them for being a little aggressive at the plate, but...
not always. In some games, yes.
Not always, but I think that this is a matchup where Michigan should be aggressive and should really take advantage of pitches in the zone, because Arizona State's approach seems to be to pound that zone. Arizona
State, if Michigan wins or beats Arizona State twice, those are 2 very quality wins.
Yeah, and in the end, I think that Tara Blanco and Megan Betts are going to be able to do at least enough to give Michigan a chance if their offense shines through. And I have faith that this offense is going to rebound from an off performance today against New Mexico State, but we'll get to the predictions at the end of the pod. So as we mentioned, Michigan plays Arizona State 5:30 Eastern time on Thursday, March 2nd, as well as 7:30 Eastern time Sunday, February 26th this weekend. They follow that up with a showdown with UCLA, and I think UCLA is probably the best softball team in the country right now.
I would argue otherwise. I think UCLA has shown weaknesses. They lost to a Kentucky team that is a lower-ranked tier team.
They lost
in 11 innings, 2-1.
Innings.
They played an okay game against North Carolina State, beat them 8-3. Had a tight one against Georgia, 10-5.
Georgia's pretty good.
Took a late run to get into that one. I think there are weaknesses in this UCLA team. They definitely have their bread and butter in the circle. But again, for Michigan, I think it's just limiting the mistakes. You can't give a team like UCLA a lot to bite off of, and Megan Betts will have to limit the amount of pitches that she leaves over the plate. Obviously, the long ball has been a bit more even so of a plague early on this season for her than in previous years, but I don't think it's a game that by any means Michigan should go into with an expectation to blow them out, but I also fully expect to win.
I mean... When we're talking about Michigan's really tough schedule over the next 9 games, you can say that UCLA's schedule is probably more difficult. They have Oklahoma tonight, LSU tomorrow.
Yes. No, it's brutal.
Florida State, Michigan, and then Florida. Are you kidding me? I mean, there's
we're going to find out whether or not they're the best team in
I'm
the
counting
country.
4 top 10 teams. That's nuts.
But they've got a rotation.
Plus Michigan.
They've got a rotation that goes 4 deep. They've got a lineup that's solid top to bottom. I think their hitter with the lowest average in the starting lineup has like 4 or 5 home runs on the season so far. They've got power. They've got experience. Each one of their starters has started every game this season. They've got the continuity. Only one freshman in that starting lineup. And here is a name to know. Rachel Garcia, a redshirt freshman, missed last season with a knee injury, but she has come on very strong this season.
42 strikeouts and 34 2/3 of work. Her ERA is .81
Compared to 3 walks. I mean,
and she's got a counterpart in Grauer too, who's equally as good at this point so far in the season. So
Garcia threw 6 perfect games in her 2015 high school season, 10 no-hitters, hit 667 with 20 home runs.
yeah,
She is going to be a problem. Maybe not the best player in the country this season, but I think somebody to watch out for down the stretch. So I think Michigan's losing to UCLA, especially given that they will be playing them as the second half of a doubleheader, with that first game of the day being against Arizona State.
this one's a long one. We're getting a lot of content in here, probably because we have an off week next week.
Yeah, for sure.
So
We've gotta
really,
cover
really
2 weeks.
tied you over here.
Michigan's last.
I'm just thinking we've been sitting here for a while, man.
Yeah, we got in Michigan's last marquee opponent that they play is going to be Baylor. And I'd say that they, like Arizona State, are sort of a middle-of-the-road team, the type of team that Michigan will need to beat if they want to have good standing in regionals and super regionals down the line, but maybe not a team that should test Michigan to the utmost degree. Baylor went 45-14 last year, 13-4 in a Big 12 conference that really has Oklahoma and then everyone else. They're not that special. Their ace graduated last year. One note, they like to run, and I think that'll be a test for Alex Subcheck, but she's had a really good arm behind the plate so far.
Very. I think that's a great point. And also for Michigan, just another game where after playing a very long and strenuous weekend of games, if, not trial by fire or baptism by fire, this is another game where, you've faced better opponents to start the weekend, and there just can't be any let up on the gas at that point. This is a very big long haul of a week.
Yeah, I think the only game on this, 10-game slate over the Mary Nutter and Judy Garman Classic, the only game where the schedule is working against the Wolverines, I think, is their showdown with UCLA. They finish off, after playing Baylor as the first game on Friday, they finish off playing Cal State Fullerton Friday evening, 8 p.m. Eastern time, and then they play with Long Beach State 5:30 Eastern Saturday, March 4th. And those teams should both be walkovers for the Wolverines.
Yeah, I agree.
Agreed.
All right, so we're nearing the end of the podcast. I think it's prediction time for Michigan's ensuing 9 games they already won against New Mexico State. How do you guys think this is going to go for the Wolverines? It's going to be a big test.
Are we saying just record or
You can go
introducing
Yeah,
it
just
a
do a
little bit?
record. You can do game by game if you want to.
Just don't details.
Yeah, sure.
I got to tell
You
you.
can go danger softballs by danger softball
Yeah,
for each opponent.
I'll do a quick game by game. New Mexico State obviously was a win already, so chalk one up. I can't be completely wrong at this point. A&M tomorrow, I think win in a close one for the Wolverines. It's going to be the toughest game of the weekend, in my opinion, but I like that game. Bethune-Cookman, I think that's a win, if not a run rule win.
We didn't preview those teams because we think Michigan's going to win.
Yes. Florida State, I think, is maybe one of the stumbling blocks. They haven't faced a lot of competition yet, but I still think there's a lot of talent on that team, so I'm going to go a close loss on Sunday morning. And then Michigan, time and again, has shown that after a loss, they come and they bounce back, and the bats are just on fire in the opening parts of this season. So Arizona State may be in for a little bit of a hitting show on Sunday afternoon, so I'm going to go a win there. So that's 4-1 on the first half of the weekend here. And then go into the Garmin, I think they beat Arizona State again on Thursday. I think UCLA, they also win that game. Again, I don't like UCLA's early season schedule that much, and also, as we mentioned, they go through a damn buzzsaw this weekend. So that's going to be a very tired and beleaguered UCLA team coming in next Thursday, so I like a win there as well. Baylor, Cal State, Fullerton, and Long Beach, I think all wins too. So if you tally all that up, 9-1 split between the Nutter and the Garmin.
All right, Kev, what do you think?
I think JP's very bullish again. I like
It's bullish, but I think instead of being so egregious as to just go undefeated predictions on everything, I had to look for...
You had to put a wrinkle in there.
Right.
Overall, for the 10 games, including the win today, I think 7-3. I really do.
What 3 losses?
I think Florida State, 1 to Arizona State, and UCLA.
I think that sounds pretty fair.
Because A&M, I could see the loss coming either to 1 against Arizona State or A&M or Baylor. So I'll throw them in a hat and just.
My next closest pick for a loss would be against A&M over UCLA, but
I just think UCLA and Florida State are so. They are in a different tier of softball than Michigan is right now. At this, maybe it's different in 2 months, but right now they're clicking, and Michigan is still trying to figure out what works and figure out what doesn't work.
I think that there are a lot of teams that are highly ranked at this point, but we don't know much about any of the teams that Michigan is going to play against. We don't even know much about this Michigan team. They haven't shown as well as they could have so far.
The sample size is card.
Yeah, exactly. They've been pretty inconsistent, but at the same time, it's tough to know exactly what you're getting from their opponents. With that being said, I think Michigan goes 8-2 over this stretch. I'm optimistic that the bats will get going. My one big cause for concern is whether the rotation can manage with just Blanco and Betza in the circle. If any of them run into any trouble, I don't know how much both the coaching staff or me personally trust Leah Crockett to come in and put out fires.
She can pitch against Bethune Cookman.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Let's not diminish what she is capable of, but
just inexperience going into a lot of tough games. So
for sure. So I think Michigan's getting run ruled against UCLA. I don't think that's going to be a close game. It's just everything's going against the Wolverines. They'll be playing out in California, which is close enough to be in home field to UCLA. A lot closer to that than for the Wolverines. And I think the other loss probably comes against Arizona State. I like them against A&M. I like them against Florida State. I think Michigan matches up well. As long as the bats are going, they're going to have a very good chance. So put me down for 8-2. So we'll finish this up with one thing that we've learned and one thing that we still want to know. I guess I'll go first. I learned that the hot dog sandwich thing is pretty polarizing among the team. I hope we're not starting any fights in the locker room.
Yeah, more polarizing than politics. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, well, yeah.
No comment.
It's a.
I'm just saying.
It's an issue with deep philosophical roots, and people
exactly.
People can disagree one way or another, and often quite vehemently. One thing that I still want to know. I want to know what you were hot. No, I was gonna throw a barb at you for the Courtney Richardson interview, but that seems a little.
I think I figured it out. I'll talk to Apple. I'll get a nice. I mean, basically, I lost out on 5 minutes of really good content here, and it's Apple's fault, not my fault. Never my fault.
That's fair. One thing I want to know is what version of Megan Betza we're going to see against the high-profile team she's facing this weekend, because she's really shown out against Florida, but at the same time has been inconsistent at times, and Michigan's going to need her to be absolutely dialed in order to go 8-2 or 9-1 on this stretch.
Yeah,
either of you?
One thing I learned today, Kev gives really great interviews. I like those interviews. No slight to Mo as I look over the glass
Thank
at Mr.
you, JP.
Fabry. Kev, you're just a personable guy. You know that? I'm a big fan.
I don't like this. This is definitely
water under the bridge, old friend.
This is sarcastic, I think.
and one thing that I still want to know is, I was going to say the same thing that Mo did about what version of Megan Betza will come out in the circle this weekend. I will come to a different what I want to know, in that I'd like to know how the bottom of the lineup fares after, a very cold start to the weekend today. Do we see some shuffle ups in that bottom of the order, and how that really wraps around what's really been a fiery top of the order so far?
All you, Kev.
I learned that UCLA has a lot of players that are hitting over 400.
They're really good. They are really good.
And they have a lot of pitchers that have a sub-1 ERA.
But it'll be a win.
I mean, you have your opinions. I have mine. You know what? It's a tough schedule for them. I don't know. We'll see. That's one thing I learned. One thing I want to know is, let's see how these 10 games play out. I mean, this is going to be it's not an easy schedule in terms of the travel, in terms of the opponents, in terms of the timing, but the same can be said for a lot of the teams in these two tournaments. So it's just something you have to get past, and at the end of the day, win games. So
win the game.
Win the game. Okay, Mitch.
Michigan's going to have to do that 9 more times over the course of this weekend. Should be very fun to follow, even if we can't bring you the coverage. So be sure to be tuned in on Twitter Flow Softball if you have the cash to throw around.
We will be in Kentucky, though.
Yep, follow the live stats. We will be tuning in as much as we can. And thank you for listening to this episode of East of the Rockies. One final note, if you have any questions for us that you want us to bring up on the pod, we have an email address. JP, what is that? Because I forgot it.
eotrpod@gmail.com.
Send the messages that way, and we will receive them. If you've enjoyed listening, like us on iTunes, give us a review, all that good stuff. But for now, for Kevin Klein, Jeremy Parks, I'm Morris Fabry, and we will play out.
I don't